Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Do Good to Lead Well podcast series. I'm your host, Craig Dowden, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today during this live conversation. And for those of you who are return listeners and attendees for the live conversation, a warm welcome back. For those of you who are new to the Do Good to Lead Well universe, an equally warm welcome. It's awesome to have you with us here today. As a bit of backstory in terms of the podcast, the Do Good to Lead Well podcast was launched in advance of the publication of my first book, Do Good to Lead Well, The Science and Practice of Positive Leadership. And in my role as an executive coach and keynote speaker, I have the profound privilege to speak to amazing best-selling authors, thought leaders, global researchers, top CEOs, chairs, founders of amazing companies. And so what I wanted to do was broaden this conversation to a wider audience. And because of your ongoing support, your social shares, your feedback, your enthusiastic comments and suggestions, we've been ranked in the top 0.5% globally in terms of podcast ranking. And this could not have happened without your support. And the primary reason for the popularity of this podcast series is because of the phenomenal guests that we're able to speak with. And this is no exception today. I am deeply honored to be welcoming the co-chairs of the Coalition for a Better Future to the Do Good to Lead Well podcast. And we're going to be digging into the amazing work that they do. And as a bit of background, the Coalition for a Better Future is a diverse group of over 140 organizations working together to focus on sustainable, inclusive economic growth. So you can see already how this is such a beautiful connectivity within the Do Good to Lead Well universe and having a positive impact. And a warm thank you to Goldie Hyder, the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada, for making this introduction. Now, to start, the Honorable Anne McClellan, and this is going to be a very brief bio, served 4 terms as the Liberal MP for Edmonton Centre, during which she was Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Minister of Health, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and Minister of Natural Resources. In May 2015, Ms. McLellan became Dalhousie University's 7th Chancellor, a position she held until May of 2020. Ms. McLellan serves on the board of Invest Alberta Corporation as vice chair. Among her many community commitments, she is chair of the board of the TELUS Edmonton Community Board. She also serves on the boards of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research and the Institute of Corporate Directors. The Honorable Lisa Raitt, who I'm thrilled to welcome as well, brings a wealth of experience from the public and private sectors. She was elected into the House of Commons in 2008, holding 3 senior portfolios, serving as Minister of Natural Resources, Minister of Labor, and Minister of Transport. Most recently, Ms. Raitt was the Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition and the Conservative Party of Canada. Having joined CIBC Capital Markets in January 2020, her current role involves senior client coverage and business development, primarily within the energy, infrastructure, and industrial sectors. Before her current role, Ms. Raitt was the President and CEO of the Toronto Port Authority, and in 2020, Ms. Raitt was named a Woodrow Wilson Center Global Fellow of the Canada Institute. So just absolutely awesome. So a very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Well, this is just great. And again, what I really appreciate, both Anne and Lisa are open to your questions, so please take advantage to speak and share. This is such exciting work that you're doing in the organization, in this collaboration. So perhaps this is where we can start the discussion. So what inspired you both in terms of forming the Coalition for a Better Future?
I will go first and just give you a very brief overview of how we came to exist. But coming out of COVID, a group of people started to worry about Canada's economic growth, the trajectory of that growth. It had already been slowing down pre-COVID, but certainly we joined the rest of the world in terms of having our economy shut down. But people started, your audience may remember, to talk about building back better. Joe Biden, for example, talked a lot about that. Prime Minister Trudeau picked up that tagline, if you like, build back better, as did others around the world. So this group of people came together in Canada and said, what would that mean for us? And how, in fact, do we make sure that we take the lessons we've learned from COVID, like disruptions of supply chains? How do we take those lessons and build for the future? And this group of people, actually, Lisa and I had done a project together before on deliberative democracy. And I think some of the people who were talking about creating a coalition to, in essence, build back better, and what that means to all of us is inclusive, sustainable economic growth. This group of people had seen the work that Lisa and I did together on the deliberative democracy exercise and thought, okay, we don't want this to be a partisan endeavor. We want this to be what we now call cross-partisan. Economic growth and getting the right kind of economic growth, which for us is inclusive and sustainable, is too important to Canada, to the future of our children, our grandchildren, our communities, to make this a partisan issue. So they reached out to Lisa and me with our particular and different partisan political backgrounds and asked whether we would work together as co-chairs of the coalition. And we said absolutely, because we both agreed that economic growth is so important to everything we want for our communities, our families, our country. And we started working. We have an advisory council, which is representative of different interests and diversities here in Canada. They advise Lisa and me and help Lisa and me as we go about the work of the coalition. But what we decided to do was that we needed to measure economic growth, and we needed to measure the inclusive and the sustainability parts of economic growth. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk about how we actually go about measuring inclusive, sustainable economic growth.
Thank you very much, Anne. Craig, you'll notice that we do this a lot. We hand it over to one another. So good luck getting a question in between the two of us. We'll take the whole hour if you let us.
I love it.
But so I just want to say one little thing about the motivation. One of the motivators as well is since 2003, we've had 7 federal elections. 5 of them have returned minority governments. And Anne and I both have sat in majority government, and we've sat in a minority government. And I don't know if I'm speaking for you, Anne, but I'll speak for me on this one. When you're in a minority government, your focus is always about how do you get a majority government. And your election posturing oftentimes is just about capturing those last few seats you need to cobble together a majority. And as a result, there's not a lot of big thinking going on. There's not a lot of, thinking 20 years into the future on what does long-term economic growth mean. And just as a reality of where we are in a political system, that was missing. So here we were in 2021 and realizing, man, we're falling behind. We think we're falling behind. We're not really sure. So we better figure out what to do. There had been a lot of reports that had been done by various governments. It's something ministers like to do. They ask for a report on something, they put together a blue ribbon panel, and they get the report, and then they promptly put it in a bookshelf where it gathers dust in Ottawa for a couple of years. We had a lot of those that had some really great work. So we knew we weren't going to be a think tank. We knew we weren't going to do that kind of commission work because lots of people do it. And the angle was, in a cross-partisan way, take a very clear look at certain key performance indicators and tell the truth about what's going on, and do it annually and report it annually, and use media and use podcasts to try to amplify the message so that we're providing directly to Canadians the true stuff, exactly what's going on in the economy and why it matters. And one last political thing. Ministers are prone to want to use the statistics that make them look better. And we're not changing statistics. We got the 21, we're going to use them. And that's just
Is this
the way.
where I hold up the scorecard, Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you have it. Anne and I are very much analog. We're not so much digital. It's just a function. So we like our picture of our scorecard.
Yeah.
21 KPIs. We divide them out into 3 big chunks, we'll like to call it. But really what we're taking a look at is whether we're living better, whether we're growing sustainably. And last one, Anne, is
winning globally.
Winning globally. Thank you. And we divide it out underneath that a little bit further. So we're going into our 4th year now, and what we have seen is that maybe we're doing well in some areas, but overall, it's pretty fragile. And we have to put some serious attention into the long-term economic growth of the country and start building plans around it and start talking about it more. I will say that one of the interesting things that has happened is that I think Anne and I have been pretty good at amplifying the message. And one of the things that we talked about a lot was productivity. And you'll notice that that is the hot topic right now. It's all about productivity all the time. And we try to measure productivity as best as we can. And we talk about GDP per capita, and we talk about how Canada is not doing well vis-a-vis the United States or Australia. We should be doing better. Some things will crop up along the way that we need to deal with. The housing crisis, for one, we really had to pivot and incorporate some thinking around that, because that's going to impact our prosperity. That's going to impact the future. And the last thing I would say is through Shell Canada, Anne and I, even though we don't look like university students any longer, are on a university tour. And we go out and we talk to young men and women in public policy, law, or business, depending on what the university wants to do. And we go and we chat with them about long-term economic growth. And for the first part, we'd hear a lot about mental health issues and wanting to have funding for mental health. But man, that is completely pivoted to what the future looks like. Affordability, housing. It's still important, mental health issues, but it's really, you can see what the future looks like. And we do some polling with Nick Nanos, and he is helping us to see as well that it's getting worse in the country in terms of how young people feel about how we're doing. So that's kind of what we do. We measure it all, report it with the Telfer School in the University of Ottawa. Yay, thank you, Telfer School of Management, for doing the analysis for us. And yeah, I got to get the plugs in, man. And and they help us with that. So it's completely nonpartisan. They do all the measurement, and we measure every year. So we do it in March.
I love it. Yeah, go ahead, Anne.
Just on the March reference, we do what we call our big reveal, which is, in fact, the data for these 21 metrics that you see here on the scorecard. And as Lisa's mentioned, Telfer School of Management, 2 of their professors, 2 of their PhD students work to collect the data. And an interesting point, Craig, which probably wouldn't surprise you. In some areas, this country's not great at even collecting the basic data, right? Mm-hmm. And you really can't paint a true picture without good data and timely data. And that continues to be a bit of a challenge. But we do have also a great partnership with Stats Canada. Yeah. And they, in fact, provide us with as much up-to-date data as they can. But in terms of release on an annual basis of our results, every March, as Lisa said, in Ottawa, we bring together a group of people. We have a couple of panel discussions focusing on particular areas of the scorecard. And we do it in Ottawa because that gives us the opportunity to invite ministers, to invite senior public servants, people from the universities, from think tanks, from NGOs that are based in Ottawa, so that we can amplify the voice of the coalition in terms of what we're hearing and seeing on an annual basis.
Love that. And so many comments already about how awesome this is. And I've got questions coming in, so excited to get to those. And to me, just love that focus, the evidence-based focus, because that evidence-informed decision-making, I think that's so incredibly important. And then also, I love how you talked about the overarching goal being economic growth and a positive future for all generations. And that's something that brings us together, which is a beautiful kind of segue to my first question. from Irina, who said, I love the word cross-partisan. I love how you're working together despite being on opposite sides of the political aisle. How did that happen? How are you able to make this work? I think it's, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, as I said at the beginning, Lisa and I actually did not know each other before. We didn't overlap in Ottawa. Unfortunately, democracy reared its ugly head in 2006, and the government of which I was a part, Paul Martin's, we were defeated.
Yeah.
So Lisa and I did not overlap, but in fact, we did this deliberative democracy exercise together at the behest of two national organizations who work in the global affairs area. And it was great. And actually, I think, Lisa, we both enjoyed the actual substance of that deliberative democracy exercise, which in fact was run, the back office of that exercise was run by Stanford University. And I don't know whether there's anything about that on YouTube or not, Lisa, but if there was, people should take a look because it's pretty revealing in terms of where Canadians end up on important issues if they all start from the same evidence base, right? The same factual base. And people work hard to put together the information behind each of the questions, bringing together a group of experts and come up with an agreed, regardless of background. You can tell it takes time to come up with that state of agreed facts. But then you put Canadians together, and one of the things Stanford discovered was that through that exercise, Canadians actually are less polarized, and probably doesn't surprise us, but less polarized than their American friends and cousins. And Stanford has done this exercise in a number of different places. So all that to say that Lisa and I did that exercise together. And I think probably Goldie Hyder, who you've already mentioned, knows both of us and thought, we don't want this to be a partisan issue. It's too important to the country and our future. So why don't we see if these two women from different political parties would think about co-chairing this initiative? And we said, sure, because one, we know how important it is. And two, we both believe that one of the messages we send subliminally is that, you know what? People from different political backgrounds can work together, need to work together. And that doesn't mean that we agree on every, approach to a particular public policy issue. But what it means is that we agree that this is so important that we can come together, put what we believe to be the data in front of people and talk about what reasonable public policy outcomes would be.
Yeah. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I would also point out the fact that Anne and I are both from Nova Scotia, and we're both lawyers, and we're both seen, I think, from outside of our party as being reasonable, pragmatic politicians. So that kind of goes with the territory. I would say one last thing on this topic. One of the important features of having two different parties as co-chairs is we're able to make sure that our communications are not biased in one way or another. I can't help myself but to talk sometimes as if I'm a conservative, because I am a conservative. Anne probably has the same issue as it comes to being a liberal. So we try to make sure that we're not setting off any dog whistles as we send out information, which would cause a party to say, I don't know if I believe these guys, because we have to have cooperation writ large.
I love it. And this is, and again, another question that's come through on this, a related question from Kevin saying, really appreciate the word polarized because it seems like people are more polarized now than ever before. Any advice for how to lower the emotional temperature in conversations we have and have more constructive dialogue?
I think it probably starts with listening to, if you like, I don't like to think of the other side, but listening to each other, right? And being respectful and listening. I know myself, sometimes I will be out somewhere here in Edmonton and somebody will say, oh, can you believe what, you know, ex-minister just did? And my reaction sometimes is it's reflexive, right? What do you mean? There was nothing wrong. And, you know, you sort of have to gut check yourself, right? And say, hey, you know, we need to listen to each other. We need to understand the factual basis from which someone is coming, right? Because people, even good friends of mine, I cannot believe where some of them get their information these days, right? I mean, disinformation, misinformation that may have informed something they just said to me. And I have to, as opposed to reacting, you know, quite as vociferously as I might, I try to say, okay, that's interesting. Where did you get that information from? And find out where exactly where their influences are. And then I think that kind of helps, at least in my case, I can position that person in terms of why they said that and why their reaction was the way it was. And, you know, people don't have to agree. I mean, we have in our membership, I mean, for example, all our members, organizations have made a commitment to net zero 2050. But we know that they will all have different ways of getting there. And some people may believe that a carbon tax imposed on consumers is a good deal. Others may say, no, it should only be on industrial emitters, whatever, right? Some people may say, no, a carbon tax actually isn't the right tool to use to help us get to net zero 2050. So Lisa and I are not in the business of trying to prescribe what each of our member organizations thinks is the best policy options for them to get where they need to go on an issue like that. But we hope that everybody is working in their own areas from a shared factual basis, right? And it can be pretty macro or general. You know, yes, climate change is happening. Look around us. We have to take action, right? It can be pretty macro, but you know, I think that's listening and trying to understand where people are coming from. Lisa, over to you.
I would submit that when we say polarization, I think what we're talking about really is people in confrontational ways talking about issues. I don't think it's polarization. I think, like we showed in the Stanford work, we're pretty pragmatic people in Canada. You know, we don't have that big range of opinions like they do in the United States between the different forces. And what happens in Canada, we battle over those swing voters. And so therefore swing voters can see themselves in either conservative, liberal, or NDP or Green. They can see themselves. So we want to get those voters, of course, in our basket so that we win. And the reason why I say I don't feel that polarization is there is that it allows us to do some really cool things like the coalition, that you're not called a traitor to your party, which is something in the United States is a little bit more difficult to do. Like there's cross-partisan stuff, but I don't see anything holding as long as continuous, including different stakeholders, as what we've been able to accomplish here. And I do think it's a function of Canada as a result. So I'm very optimistic. I think the voices get louder when we're close to the end of a government. Sorry, Anne. We're at the end of a cycle of government. We had the same thing with us in 2015 with Harper. You could say it was polarized. It was just really vocal anti-conservative. And now you've got vocal anti-whatever. And that's what you're hearing and seeing. But I don't think people aren't, I think we've got polarization in foreign policy. And I think that is a problem. But for the most part, I feel very comfortable with our democratic way. And someone's going to win the next election and it'll be calm again for a while. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then it's not calm. It's 10-year cycles.
All right. Yeah, exactly. The ebb and flow. And I've got so many, I want to read some of the comments that this is awesome. I love the energy and connection between Anne and Lisa. really appreciate the transparency and openness about potential biases and how it's important to listen. Has this always been part of your leadership style, or is this something that you've grown into during your careers?
When I was a minister, I'll tell you a story. When I was a minister, and something would go wrong, and something always went wrong when you were a minister, by the way. When I would sit down with the department and I would sit down with the staff, I would always say to them, we're going to go through what happened, but we're not doing it to point fingers at one another. We're doing the autopsy because we don't want this to ever happen again. So they knew in the room that I wasn't looking for a scapegoat. And that's always kind of been the way I work. Anne?
I would agree. I think the first thing a minister needs to learn, maybe a member of parliament too, in terms of listening to their constituents, but certainly as a minister, you need to listen a lot. You need to listen to your department. You need to listen to your cabinet colleagues. You need to listen to your stakeholders. And it's through that listening that I think then, at least in my case, I was able to work with my political staff and others to understand issues, understand why some things were possible and other things weren't that my stakeholders might have liked. So yeah, I think in government, I always worried when I was working with colleagues who seemed to have definitively worked out what exactly the right answer was to this problem. Yeah. And I think it's so important to understand that people will be around the table at whatever order of government or in a corporation, right? Or wherever, an NGO. People will be around the table who come from different places with different backgrounds and different perspectives, and they have different stakeholders whose points of view they feel they have to put on the table. So I think listening should play a big role in, and I love the autopsy. I mean, Lisa's right. Things always go wrong, and that's when the minister should really be listening. Is it why did it go wrong? And more times than not, what went wrong was directly due to me. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, it was.
And the Liberals always screwed it up.
Boom! And there's the
Excuse me.
Sorry, I destroyed your vulnerable moment. My bad.
That's right.
Yeah. I know.
I don't think you did anything wrong, Anne. I think you're taking too much on
not wrong, but you know, you'd be out in an event, right? And somehow it didn't go quite the way you'd hoped, or there, you know, you made maybe a flippant response, as opposed to, you know, we all have those moments, right? And then, you know, your staff take you aside and said, well, there's tomorrow's headline, Minister. Right.
True. Yes, Craig. Now that I'm in private practice, and specifically I work at a bank, I would give you my observation that it's hard work. The leadership style is hard work of listening, but building relationships. Right. You have to. It's not just listening to your constituents. It's making sure that even though you're in Ottawa for a long time, when you come back to that community, you still have those relationships intact, because they're the ones that are going to knock doors with you, not the people in Ottawa. So right. I find that what the biggest secret to leadership is you got to work your butt off. Like, you're working all the time to develop and maintain relationships, and it's hard work. And name an issue that you may have in a corporation. What it oftentimes comes down with is you didn't put the time in to make sure that the parties were all in agreement with you. Right, Anne?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, motivation, I think a part of leadership is motivating your supporters, your constituents, those people you want to go out and knock on doors. And, you know, motivating, that too is hard work, right? I mean, to have the energy, the emotional, the EQ, the physical energy, all those things that go together, your inspiration, you know, explaining your goals and why they matter to you, and you hope they'll matter to others. That motivation, it's, again, it's not easy. It doesn't come without hard work.
Well, again, great comments coming in, flying into the chat box. I won't get to all of them. It's just great, very inspiring, wonderfully insightful. Love this conversation. And what I really appreciate about how in your answers around that listening, again, back to listening, and I love the focus also on safety. Like, hey, things aren't going to work out. There are going to be missteps now. How do we learn? And in order to learn, we have to get everything on the table so we can listen to one another, come to some agreement around how do we prevent this or minimize the chance of going to happen again. So powerful, because back to building a better future. And I love this. So great segue to another question. Chris was saying, I wasn't aware of this amazing coalition before today. I'm so glad I tuned in. This has been great. How do everyday Canadians become a part of building a better future?
I love you for asking, Chris. And do we have an idea for Chris?
Yes, go ahead. Lisa, do you want to explain our new campaign?
Sure. Okay, I will. Thank you. By the way, Craig, before I talk about our new campaign, I want to let you know that Anne talking about the passion behind motivating people, sometimes when we're out and we're doing one of these events, Anne gets so into the moment, I turn to her later and say, so are you running to be the Liberal Party leader again, Anne? Is that where we're going on this? Because she's right into it and it's all fired up. And I think, well, she would be formidable. I'd like to see her back as Prime Minister. But
no,
anyway.
Not happening. Just let's put that out there, Craig, this morning.
You've heard it here first. Going viral on YouTube. Here we go. Yeah, exactly.
Campaign Minister Lisa Raitt. It's cross-partisan time, folks.
Exactly.
That's all politics. Thank you very much for the question, Chris. I will tell you that when Anne and I go across the country, we talk to chambers of commerce, we talk to all kinds of different places. Oftentimes people will say, I love this. How do we get involved? Because our membership isn't companies. Our memberships are the organizations that companies belong to. So Community Foundations of Canada is our member, not the Community Foundation of North Halton, of which I sit on the board. They are indirectly, but you know what I mean. So we decided that the one piece that's missing is right now that reach right through organizations into the individual. And as a result, we started a campaign, and what we are hoping that we'll get from Canadians is an idea of what economic growth means to you. What does it mean to you? Because in order to change the hearts and minds of politicians and get on the radar, you have to get them at the door, and you have to tell them what matters to you about economic growth. And they want to know. Look, politicians want to know what's going on out there. And every different stripe we talk to, every government across Canada, every opposition across Canada, they always say the same thing. What are you hearing? What's going on out there? What's happening? And we thought it would be a great opportunity to reach through and invite Canadians to tell them what economic growth means to you. And I use the example for me. Economic growth is important to me because my husband has Alzheimer's. He's in a long-term care home. And I know that there's a lot more coming behind him, and we don't have the system ready for it. And it's going to take a huge investment. So I need economic growth to ensure that something's going to be available for me or for anyone in my age group in the years come. And Anne, what does economic growth mean to you?
People may find this strange, but that's because you don't know where I was brought up. I was brought up on a dairy farm outside Truro, Nova Scotia. And my brother and my two nephews run that dairy farm. They've expanded it dramatically from the time I was a kid growing up there. But economic growth for me means that they have sustainable, reliable infrastructure so they can get their product, milk, to market, that they have the power, because get this, my nephews milk cows using robots.
Wow.
Right? If you don't have reliable power, you can't milk the cows with robots, right? So you can't have economic growth without that sustainable, reliable infrastructure that farmers in places like Nova Scotia, but all over this country need. And that leads to another little thing that Lisa and I are focusing on in terms of keeping score, and that is putting a rural and small town lens on some of our metrics. One of our members is the Dairy Farmers of Canada, and they are providing us the means to ask our data collectors to do a deep dive on rural and small town Canada. And results there are interesting, probably not surprising, but that's what economic growth means to me.
Yeah.
Well, I love it, and I'll make sure in the show notes that we have the link so people can have their voice to be heard. And I think it's such a powerful opportunity for all of us. And again, and I think that's great. I love the whole philosophy around working together. And again, listening back to this, maybe the word of the day is listening to each other, learning from each other. And I think it's so powerful. It's such a tremendous opportunity and such a pivotal moment for us to be thoughtful around these issues and opportunities, and then how do we come together to be able to figure them out. This is just so many questions. I love it. I think it's great. Chris said, I'm so inspired by both of you, not just in terms of what you stand for, how you stand for it. I'm starting my career and aspiring to be an effective leader. Any advice for me in terms of how I should approach this journey?
Well, I would say, well, we've already talked about the importance of listening. I also think it's probably important to approach whatever project you're leading with a certain amount of humility, right? I think humility is important, and sometimes we're all in situations where we forget that. But I think not walking into a room and, being too aggressive about that, being, hey, I'm here and I'm the leader. And one of the things, Lisa, I try not to do, even as minister, I tried to sit in the middle of the table, not at the top of the table.
I agree.
Right?
Agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Because where you position yourself physically in the room matters as well, in terms of creating that environment where everybody's included, and it's not you at the top of the table and everybody looking at you. There's a lot of pressure on you too if everybody's looking at you. I just think humility is an important part of the leadership journey. I think listening, as we've already discussed. I think understanding what the project is, whatever it is. I think someone who wants to be a leader needs to be able to define what the project is, what the plan is to the team, if you've got one, and so that people understand expectations. I mean, if people don't understand what the plan is and what the expectations are in terms of how to deliver on the plan, there can be a lot of cross lines and misunderstandings and things. And that happens quite a bit in politics with your political staff, sometimes with your department or your colleagues. I think clarity around what we're working on and what everybody expects from each other.
Yeah, a leader has to do more work than the people on the team, my opinion. You got to be prepared more. And this is going to sound so bizarre, but one of the earliest lessons I learned was from a Dale Carnegie course. And it's simple. It's people like people who like them. So if you show that you like someone, they're going to like you back. And it's as simple as that. And that's kind of how, even politically, I never would go over and shoot, daggers at anyone in opposition. I would maybe pretend to like them, but at least I pretended to like them, and then they would like me, and then we'd have a relationship. So, it kind of works its way out. But I think that has always been kind of how I worked my way through stuff, that if you need to have people to like you, to want to follow you and respect you, of course, you're not their buddies, but you want to be there, but you got to show that you like them and you enjoy them as well.
Well, and again, I love that, and so many positive comments once again coming through, and really appreciate highlighting the humility aspect, and then also creating those positive connections with each other. There's a lot of focus you see in conversations and thought pieces around the importance of empathy for leadership and leadership effectiveness. And you've touched on different elements of empathy, so I'd love to hear about how do you feel empathy serves or doesn't serve if it's the being in a position of leadership, as well as the work that you do in the coalition in terms of connecting with stakeholders and advancing your mission?
Well, empathy has to be authentic, or it's pandering.
You
Mm.
know, Lisa, I'm just thinking about empathy. When we go to the University of Ottawa, a School of Business Management every year, and there's a conference that we attend organized by that School of Management to bring young people together from all over the country, and they spend a couple of days together. And I'm thinking, when you listen to those young people, and Lisa and I sit at different tables, obviously, and are listening to young people's experiences. What does economic growth mean to you? Maybe not the direct question always, but certainly the questions the young people are addressing at their tables feed into that. And, you know, the empathy for the struggle. And Lisa's already referred to the Nick Nanos work around young people and the fact that they're being overcome to a much higher degree than anyone expected, including Nick himself, with pessimism. And what does the future hold for me? Will my future look like my parents? Will I be better off? Will I ever own a home? Can I have kids? What are we doing on climate change as young people look at fires and floods? And I think when you listen to those young people, you have to be empathetic, because at least in my case, I'm at the end of my career in some respects, and I'm older. And but when I listen to these young people, I think empathy is so important in terms of understanding. It would be so easy to say, oh, you guys, you're a bunch of whiners, you're entitled kids, right? But actually, they're living through some very, very difficult stuff coming through COVID. Some of those young people wondering whether they actually may be called up to serve in a war.
Yeah.
Lisa and I never had to deal with that, right? Craig,
No.
you probably didn't either, right? No, of course not. And some of those young people wondering, could there be another world war or a conflagration conflict in which I might be called upon to serve? You have to be empathetic to all those pressures that those young people are going through and understand where they're at. And Lisa, you've got two sons.
Yeah,
So you live this in terms of understanding where their pressure points are, and actually how hard it is right now for a lot of young people to work through this stuff.
Yeah. And we don't want them just to give up on Canada, because Canada is the best country in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they shouldn't be run out of it. So I'm with you on the empathy side, but I want to one last aspect on empathy that I think we have to remember is that it's not just empathy for within your team. I think it's important to have empathy for those who are on the other side or your competitor as well. And sometimes you miss that in business, quite frankly. You don't put yourself in the shoes of the other party or to the contract or the other individual, or if you're doing labor relations, you don't think about how the union thinks. You're thinking only about what's important for yourself. And I think putting yourself in the shoes of another person. I was so lucky, maybe Anne agreed, we were so lucky to be cabinet ministers where you were always balancing multiple stakeholders, and no one was ever going to get the absolute upper hand every single time.
No, and I think it's such a great, and again, so many comments coming through, and I love the point that both of you are making. And again, it's just a through line through this conversation. And also, Lisa, your observation around the authentic, that genuine empathy and genuine curiosity, because that's really, and that allows us, and I love how both of you have made this point throughout our conversation today around getting those issues on the table, diverse issues on the table. How do we talk about them openly and transparently, which so many people have commented on in terms of both of you? And I have this great message I want to take, because I think this just shows when these kinds of conversations can happen. This is why I was so excited for us to talk today, because Tara said such an inspiring conversation and collaboration, a very hopeful message for everyone. Canada needs more of this. I think that's a great, like, once again, really, really powerful. And thank you to both. And so another question from Ted saying, this is really great. Both of you seem to be doing a master class in having difficult or uncomfortable conversations. Any advice for us in terms of how to engage with the other side, in terms of how we can talk about things that matter most? This is inspiring to me.
Lisa?
I would say, as a co-chair, that sometimes when you're trying to lead in a certain direction, whatever it is that you want personally has to be shelved. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Your personal outcome, how you would like to see it happen, especially working collaboratively, has to be shelved. It's I don't have the luxury of imposing my point of view when I'm listening to what other people's points of view are. I have the luxury of making decisions, but I don't have the luxury of telling people. Let me put it this way: we're sitting at a cabinet meeting, and we all say, "Let me start by telling you what I think should happen." The prime minister starts every time like that. You're not going to have an open dialogue kind of thing.
No. I think again, it's about being open, approaching discussions with a certain degree of humility, not checking. And in my case, I do have to do this more often than I would like to think I'd have to, is just checking that gut reaction to say no. And if you've just heard a groan, that's my dog. My dog is here, and so far Bentley hasn't barked, but he is snoring, ladies and gentlemen. You hear a strange noise. It's Bentley on the floor beside me snoring right now. So yeah, I think it's about keeping an open mind, understanding that people are entitled to different perspectives. They come from different places. And again, going back to listening, and it doesn't mean you're always going to agree, right? In public life, even around the same cabinet table, you may choose to argue for a different approach to a public policy problem. Yep. But that doesn't mean your colleague's wrong. It means they are coming from a different place with different pressures, with different stakeholders, whatever the case may be. And it is humbling when, you know, as I say, when around the cabinet table, you get your, I always call it a Nova Scotia expression, your ears pinned back, right? In terms of, oh gosh, I guess maybe I didn't know as much about that as I thought I did, right?
Yeah.
You have to take that on board and hopefully become a better person, a better minister, a better colleague when you realize that compromise is almost always the answer. Even, you know, the prime minister, you know, hardly Mr. Chrétien may have come into the room thinking, this is where I want this to go. But he always went around the table on tough issues. Do you know, Lisa, we only put up our hands once on one issue because you never vote around the cabinet.
Never vote around. Yeah. And explain the concept of cabinet solidarity, because I think that's missing a little bit in society as well.
Well, cabinet solidarity, you go into the cabinet room on an issue. Minister may have, you know, an issue. I'll give you one on which, strangely, it's because it's the only one we ever voted on, buying those 4 British submarines. And the cabinet was all over the place. Mr. Chrétien went around the table, each one of us. He asked each one of us to speak to the issue. And that never happened with Mr. Chrétien, right? And he went around that table and said, are you yes or no to purchasing the submarines? And then he said, I want to see a show of hands. And people were all over the place on that issue because we had just slashed the heck out of transfer payments to the provinces, public service, whatever. And we did end up buying the submarines, and one can certainly question or not whether that was the best decision. They've been in dry dock an awful lot since the 20-some years ago we bought them. But, but once that discussion was over, to Lisa's point, solidarity, everybody left that cabinet room and there was not one dissenting voice publicly. That, people may have gone back to their offices and grumbled to their chiefs of staff or their deputy ministers. There was not one public representation from a cabinet minister around that discussion or in disagreement with the final decision. And that's the principle of solidarity. Once you've hashed it out, you leave that room and you speak as one government.
Love that. And I think, and it's so powerful. Again, so many comments coming through. And I love that emphasis around and in that practice. And it's such a powerful idea whereby, hey, leave it all on that conference room or executive boardroom table, as opposed to, well, the things will evolve and then afterwards I'll go and complain with my colleagues or have little. And I just love that, where we need to talk about these things openly. And if we disagree, great. And how are we going to get better at managing and navigating disagreements? Then practice and going through it and all those things. I think this is just absolutely fantastic. I can't believe we're almost at the end of time. It's less than 10 minutes left. So get your final questions in. Ian said, I love your enthusiasm. What do you find is the most rewarding part about your role as co-chairs of the coalition?
Probably for me, going to the university campuses and meeting the young people and their professors and people who are working hard in the public policy space, both students and researchers and others, to come up with innovative answers to tough questions. And seeing, in spite of the pessimism that some young people have about their future, not giving into that, but saying, hey, we're going to try and find solutions to some of these big problems. And that reinvigorates me, right? If I'm feeling kind of tired or thinking, where is the end game here? If you listen to some of those young people, especially some of our Indigenous youth who are in university talking about the importance of reconciliation, their communities, how they want to work in their communities, that is empowering to me.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I'll add on our advisory council. To be honest,
yes.
In one room, we have executives from oil and gas. We have Dairy Farmers of Canada. We have Paul Genet from Power Corporation. We have Goldie Hyder from the Business, Corporation at Business Council of Canada. Perrin Beatty, formerly of the Chamber. I mean, really smart with it people who know how to think about Ed Greenspan from Public Policy Forum. I mean, lots of folks who understand greatly what is going on in terms of public policy in the country, and they get to help us kind of pick through how to communicate the importance of economic growth. In that one room, on that one call, you pretty much have every sector in Canada that is of importance represented, right to the chambers of commerce, from Main Street to Bay Street, as we like to say, and the farms in between.
Yeah, and we have charitable organizations, we have nonprofit organizations. Lisa's mentioned Goodwill Canada, we have the United Ways of Canada, we have Imagine Canada. We try and represent the breadth and depth of Canadian civil society and work to help a broader base of people understand the importance of economic growth. It's not just about business, right? It's about all of us. If you're an NGO serving the public, a food bank, for example, economic growth directly impacts how many customers you have, whether you're able to get donations, all sorts of things, right? So what we try to do is make sure everybody understands that they have a part of this economic growth agenda.
Well, and this is just fantastic. And what I love about all the points that you just made, and again, so many great comments, is that this really, to me, illustrates the power of when you have a bigger than self goal, one that unites all of us. And a testament to both of you, the passion, the comments I have about the energy and the passion, the openness, the camaraderie, like all of that, and then having advocates who passionately present that idea to engage people. I think it's just awesome. We've got a few minutes remaining, and I do want to give you both a chance. Any parting words in whatever, in terms of leadership, in terms of work with the coalition, like how can we, everybody here has been inspired by this message, how can we take action? How can we be more involved? Any final pieces of advice for us before we close today?
Hey, I would say, please go to our website and tell us what economic growth means to you, to your family, to your community, to your business. It doesn't matter, right? What does it mean to you? And please, those of you, and I'm sure most of you have teams and or you work in companies of whatever size or partnerships, whatever, encourage the people with whom you work to go on our website. And Craig, you're going to put the link there, I think. Go on our website and tell us what economic growth means to you and help us spread the word. Because I don't think we mentioned next summer, before the next election, we are going to analyze all that input that we've received, and we're going to package it and give it all to the leaders of all the major political parties running for office in the next federal election. I was ambitious and said we also were going to share it with every candidate running for elected office. Lisa suggested to me quite rightly that was too ambitious, but we will definitely share it with all the leaders. So we will be analyzing the input and we will be directly infusing it into election campaigns because we just think this, the whole economic growth agenda, why we're falling behind on productivity, why our GDP is stagnant to say the best, these issues are too important to our quality of life to not input people's feelings into the next election campaign.
Yeah.
Lisa.
And I would ask anybody who's listening, who's interested in leadership, and it's all of you, I assume, that you're needed in your community. One of the folks that we had at our conference last year was Zita Cobb, who is the proprietress of Fogo Island, and she does a lot of work on community. And what Canada is, at the end of the day, in her view, and I agree, is just we're just a bunch of communities linked to one another. And you got to be present in your community in order to help affect and impact change. So if you belong to your community and you go out there and you talk about the importance of economic growth, you have helped us greatly because you're spreading and amplifying the message that we should be thinking in election time more than just whether or not I'm going to get this tax break or whether or not I'm going to get this, whatever's going to happen in my community. It should be about, but do you have a plan to make sure that my kids don't move to the States? That's kind of what I care about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This has just been absolutely awesome. It's been inspiring conversation, insightful conversation, so many great takeaways for us. And again, to reiterate, just that focus on a collective goal, something that we all share, concern, things that matter to all of us. And I love how you talk about no matter where we are, who we are, just let's come together and have that conversation because we are more powerful as bringing all those communities together. So thank you for your service, your passion. This has just been fantastic. And everybody today who's joined, you will see in the show notes links to the website. Please have your voice be heard and be a part of this conversation. Absolutely love it. So until next time, everyone, take care and appreciate you joining the Do Good to Lead Well podcast. Bye for now.
Thank you, Craig. Bye, Lisa.
Bye, Anne.